Well, leaving possessions behind to our loved ones is what many of us will strive to do in our lifetime, and most assets fall into the category of fair market value as of the date of the descendant's death. The IRS defines fair market value as the price at which a willing buyer and a willing seller would exchange that property. Joining us by phone for a look at special use valuation and cash leasing is Kansas Farm Bureau Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen. Thanks so much for joining us, Roger. And we have to ask you first and foremost, are there any exceptions to this rule?
There is. There's a big exception, Christina, for farmers and ranchers, and it is specific for the valuation of agricultural land in a farmer or rancher's estate. And what the provision does, it's called special use valuation, and it's been around about 40 years, and it allows that land in the decedent's estate, if the estate qualifies, to be valued at its ag value instead of fair market value. And that can be a big deal, particularly if you want to continue farming in the family for generations to come, and you've got land that might be facing some upward price pressure because there might be some residential or commercial development nearby. Well, you don't have to factor that in, and you can drop the value, on average, about 50% from fair market value by using this provision. And if you got a big enough estate that might be subject to federal estate tax, that can save a lot of tax dollars.
Wow, and I do think a lot of farmers, especially these days, they want to keep that farm in the family, so that's something that could really help them out. What does a special use valuation election require for the practitioner?
Well, it requires a lot of work. This is one of these things you definitely cannot do alone, and this is one of the most complex provisions of the entire Internal Revenue Code. You got to collect data in determining the value of the decedent's land. You're going to look for comparable cash rent to the land that's in the decedent's estate. What does that land rent for? You're going to do various computations to actually compute the special use value of the land. But before that, there are a whole host of requirements that have to be satisfied for the estate to even be eligible to make the election, and then the family has to farm the land for 10 years after the decedent dies and satisfy a bunch of requirements during that 10-year period to avoid having to pay the tax back. So it's kind of like playing a game of chess. A good chess player or checker player is going to see the moves well in advance and then be able to figure out how to play the game. This requires a lot of pre-death work and a lot of post-death work, as well as actually making the election.
But it's something that could really pay off for your family members down the line, so it's important to put that work in. And I've got a tricky question for you, but I know you can probably answer it. If the land isn't leased to a family member pre-death, can the estate make the special use election?
Well, pre-death and post-death rules are different. Cash leasing is permissible pre-death to a member of the family. Post-death, it's not permissible, with three small exceptions. There is a key exception for a surviving spouse that can cash lease to a member of the surviving spouse's family. But what people need to keep in mind, the key fundamental point is that leasing arrangements have to give the landlord risk of production and risk of price change. You're not going to get there with a straight cash lease where you're getting a fixed amount of rent. You're going to have to switch it to crop share or livestock share lease at some point. That's where they need to be visiting with their practitioners to determine what are the finer points of that rule. But that's the basic thing people need to keep in mind. Cash leasing can cause some trouble here, not only for qualification, but for avoiding paying the tax back that you saved during that 10-year period post-death.
All right. Well, we really appreciate your help. I know a lot of people would pay top dollar for that kind of legal advice, and we're giving it to you right here on RFD-TV. Thank you so much. Kansas Farm Bureau Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen. We appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us.